works of Diodorus of Sicily. Yeah, the famous Diodorus they always quote, right? The Greek historian. We're going right into volume 12, all right? And we're going to be reading from book 40, the last book and the last chapter. All right, so we belly flop to this part of the book on book 40 where Diodorus basically gives his overview of the history of the Hebrews, right? And the reason he does that is because he's going to show the relationship between the ancient Greeks and these so-called Jews or Hebrews. It says here, now that we are about to record the war against the Jews, we consider it appropriate to give first a summary account of the establishment of the nation from its origins and of the practices observed among them. When in ancient times a pestilence arose in Egypt, the common people ascribed their troubles to the workings of a divine agency. For indeed, with many strangers of all sorts dwelling in their midst and practicing different rites of religion and sacrifice, their own traditional observances in honor of the gods had fallen into disuse. Hence, the natives of the land surmised that unless they removed the foreigners, their troubles would never be resolved. All right? So Diodorus is talking about literally the plagues of Egypt that we read about in the Bible. You know, what we read about Moses doing with the help of the Most High, with the staff and everything, so that Pharaoh can let his people go. Now, the way Diodorus is writing about it, he's saying there was a pestilence and that they were causing trouble to the native population, the Egyptians, right? Descendants of Mizraim and Cush. He don't mention that they were actually enslaving these other people that they wanted to get rid of. We know the other side of the story. So they wanted to get rid of the so-called Jews or Hebrews, right? These foreigners in Egypt. At once, therefore, the aliens were driven from the country, and at the most outstanding and active among them banded together, and, as some say, were cast ashore in Greece and certain other regions. So listen to what Diodorus is letting you know, that during the Exodus, right? Literally, this is what he's talking about. They weren't driven out from the country. They left. They rebelled and freed themselves from bondage out of Egypt. They left to help with the Most High. And Diodorus is letting you know that during this Exodus, right, of the Israelites, Hebrews, they banded together, and some say were cast ashore in Greece and certain other regions. Their leaders were notable men, chief among them being Danaus. Okay, Danaus. Danaus in Greek mythology was the king of Libya. His myth is a foundation legend of Argos, whose the Argives is Danites too, as one of the foremost Mycenaean cities of the Peloponnesus and Homer's Iliad. Danan's tribe of Dan, or Danaus, the Argives. Again, Danaus and the Danans are the Danites. They did come out of the Exodus. And also Cadmus, yes, the historical, mythical Cadmus, right? In Greek mythology, Cadmus was the legendary Phoenician founder of Boeotian Thebes, the founder of Thebes, okay? Cadmus, an exiled Israelite. I'm not the one saying that. Diodorus is telling us Danaus and Cadmus, they're supposed to be mythical people, half gods. And like I've been showing you, these Greeks turned a lot of these antediluvian people, characters, into gods and created a mythological story about their origins. But again, Phoenician Cadmus, who's the Phoenicians? Remember in my Nations of the World Danite video? So who are the Phoenicians? You always got to really study that. Get specific when they're saying Phoenician. Either way, Phoenicia, the land of Phoenicia, was in Canaan, the promised land. That was in America. You already know these people wore feather crowns. We got that on the last video. So Diodorus is letting you know, again, they became leaders and notable men. These people coming out of the Exodus from Egypt, these Israelites, like Danaus and Cadmus. But the greater number were driven into what is now called Judea, which is not far distant from Egypt and was at that time utterly uninhabited The colony was headed by a man called Moses, outstanding both for his wisdom and for his courage. So who are we talking about? Judea, Moses, people coming out of Egypt, same people that Danaus and Cadmus came out of. This is Diodorus letting you know, supposedly in the 1st century BC, according to their hijack chronologies, right? But they're letting you know still who these people are. Again, confirming what we've been already going over. On taking possession of the land he founded, remember that it wasn't Moses exactly who reached Jerusalem, but Joshua, his successor. Besides other cities, one that is now the most renowned of all, called Jerusalem. Now listen to Diodorus telling people about Jerusalem like they've never heard about it. This is a very old primary source, letting you know who Danaos and Cadmus people are, the same people who founded Jerusalem, who followed their leader Moses, who came out of Egypt to marry the real Egypt, America, to marry Greek. The Histories of Tacitus, an English translation with introduction, front piece, notes, maps, and index by George Gilbert Ramsey. And he's a part of all this stuff right here. This is from 1915. So this is a translation of Tacitus, Plinius Tacito, right? 5 books. We're going to go to book number 5. All right, so all the way in book number 5, this is about page 398. It says here about the Jews, right? So-called Jews. I just want to show you here. It says they're coming from Crete. Yeah, it says the story goes that the Jews were fugitives from the island of Crete, who settled upon the extreme borders of Africa. So extreme borders. So they weren't in Africa or coming from Africa, right? Either, first of all. So he said they were coming from Crete, that island with the Mycenaean Empire, right? The Mycenaeans, who were practicing Levitical laws, who are Israelites. We got Tacitus letting us know that the story, what he heard, that the Jews were fugitives from the island of Crete. They were fleeing Egypt. Remember, they were still fleeing. They were still on the move. From this book, Ancient History of Caledonia, written by Saint Chaldean and the other saints of the Chaldean faith, and chiefly by the Johnstones, who held the royal pen for many hundreds years. Translated from the Latin by the Reverend Duncan MacGregor. And this book is from 1874. It says here, Ancient History of Caledonia. After the death of Pharaoh, who loved Joseph, the king of Egypt, and his rulers saw that the Hebrews prospered more than the Egyptians, that their fields and their vines were more fruitful and pleasant, and also that their wives and daughters were more fair and beautiful than their own. Pharaoh, the king, then made a law that all those who did not bow down the knee to the bull and offer sacrifices upon the king's altar were to be double tied and their children brought into slavery, which grieved the Hebrews very much, but they still remembered their God, and went to the desert and offered sacrifice to the God of Bethel. Pharaoh then, being wroth of this, brought all the Hebrews under slavery. The Egyptian slaves got straw to make their bricks, but the Hebrews had to collect stubble and make the same number of bricks as the Egyptians, which made their task very grievous to bear. But they still trusted that God would deliver them from bondage. The king Pharaoh was enraged and ordered all the Hebrew children to be slain when they were born. This caused several of the tribes of the Hebrews to draw together, who never defiled themselves among the Egyptians. They then departed into the desert and withdrew themselves from among them. Pharaoh the king, being wroth, pursued them into the desert with horses and chariots. The Israelites, all right, now they're not just Hebrews, they're Israelites specifically, seeing Pharaoh's host at hand, cried to the God of Bethel to deliver them from the hand of their enemy. Then the God of heaven raised a storm of wind and sand, mountains high, so that they could not find them, and afterwards left them to wander through the desert of Assyria, chiefly living upon fruit. All right, remember, they're over here kind of going almost with the story of Moses, right? Exodus coming out of Egypt. A different take on it here. The king of Greece, observing encampments and being at war with the Egyptians and Assyrians, sent an ambassador to inquire if they had broken the truce that had been made. But they found nothing but working men of crafty work. Now, real quick, so you guys don't get confused. They're in the wilderness, right? They're in the desert. The Israelites just left Egypt during their exodus. They reached these lands where there's a king, so-called king of Greece. This is a Danite. This is when the Danites were ruling this part of Greece. This was a Danite. We got the other side of the story in my Danite videos. And you're going to see he didn't make war with these Israelites. So he's like, go spy on them. So he had sent somebody to spy on them. And then the person said, hey, I'm only finding working men of crafty work, namely copper, brass, dyeing and weaving, and also brick making. The king then, finding they were Hebrews, dispatched an Hebrew interpreter, whom they told that they were no rebellious people, that they were under the necessity of fleeing from Egypt to the desert from the oppression and cruelty of Pharaoh. The Hebrew servant returned and told the king of Greece that they were not men of war, but were working men of craftsmen of Egypt. The king, being pleased with such good news, sent his servant again, telling them to pitch their tents in any plain in his dominions where they pleased, telling them at the same time that they could worship their own God after their own fashion. Now, why would Greeks do that? Remember, this is a Danite, these are his people. Now, another thing I want to point out, he's saying working men of Egypt doesn't mean they're Egyptians. They were coming out of Egypt, just like a so-called gypsy is somebody who's coming out of Egypt, or an Egyptian. They would be referred to as Egyptian, or gypsies too. They're traveling right in the desert, so called gypsies. It's all going to combine. You guys will see. The Hebrews then built an altar to the Lord and offered sacrifice with great deliverance in saving them from the hands of the Egyptians. The king of Greece visited their camps with his Hebrew servant, telling them to build a city and fortify themselves against their enemies, whoever they might be. They, having confidence in this king of Greece, all right, they trust this king of Greece, and seeing that the Lord's hand was in their deliverance, commenced to build their city of Troy. Who built Troy? Israelites. And we're going to see specifically who was the founder and from which tribe of the Israelites. All right. So again, these Israelites fleeing Egypt, Exodus, just like Cadmus and Danaan. We're talking about Israelites settling down, becoming great nations, these so-called early Greek nations. Here's another case of it right here. They built the city of Troy. It was Israelites. The materials of which this city was built were bricks made of clay. This clay was dug to make a canal round the whole city, with drawbridges to draw up at any time for securing them from their enemies. The work went on so rapidly that they soon found themselves in a fortified position. And as the population increased, so did the city enlarge, the building going on with much vigor. And at the same time, the other tradesmen were employed at their own trades, supplying the other nations around them with purple, scarlet, and fine linen, purple, and war instruments of brass, copper, and iron. This surprised the kings of Egypt very much, he having labored under the impression that all the Hebrews were consumed in the mountains of sand, which nearly destroyed the Egyptians, but these had rather served as a protection to the Hebrews. The king of Greece gave every encouragement to the Hebrews, so did he adhere to their ways that he was almost persuaded to worship their God. Almost. Remember, this is a Danite who, these were sea peoples. They had gone all over the world and mixed, and, they were probably doing a little pagan stuff too. They become Hellenized. But owing to his rulers, he almost started going back to Hawa, it says here. But owing to his rulers being worshippers of the horse, they would not allow the king to turn from his former principle, namely worshiping the horse, as the priest persuaded the king if he would turn from worshiping the horse, as that was the god of the Grecians in those days, all right? So-called Grecians, that his charges would not face the battle nor enter into the war chariots. Still, the king's heart was with the Hebrews, all right? This king, this Danite, he was with his brethren, and he allowed them to go on pilgrimage to the tops of the highest mountains to worship the God of heaven for his great deliverance of them from the cow worshippers of Egypt and the tyranny of Pharaoh. Cow worshippers of Egypt, huh? Just like the Hindus. This was their custom for several hundreds of years until war fell out between Greece and Assyria. So they were there for hundreds of years, okay? The Israelites. The Hebrews then refused their young men to go to war, neither would they allow their daughters to be given in marriage to the uncircumcised Gentiles, unless they would consent to be circumcised and offer 7 years' sacrifice and worship in the god of Bethel. Afterwards, one of the Grecian princes fell wroth with the inhabitants of Troy, properly called the Trojans. Who are the Trojans? Israelites. There was born to one of the princes of Troy a daughter that expelled in beauty and virtue all the Grecian nation. The prince of the Grecians offered her his hand in marriage, but was refused by the laws of the altar. He then besieged the city of Troy with rage and drove them into the city, thinking he would make them surrender from hunger. But they cried out to the Lord, and he heard their cry and was pleased to send shoals of fish of all kinds. But the sturgeon was considered the best fish, and therefore it was chosen for sacrifice on the altar. The turtle doves and pigeons were also innumerable around the city. They also made use of them for food, being also offered for sacrifice. The wild bee was also very plentiful, supplying them with honey. They lived there in comfort, while their enemies were encamped around the city, suffering many privations. But the young generation arose, and new rulers refused to offer the sacrifices with the sturgeon, for as it was the best fish, they wished to keep it for themselves and offer other fish to the Lord. So remember, we're not reading the Bible. This is an old land document containing the history of Caledonia. All right? So because of what they were doing, Most High stopped helping them. All right, so it keeps going. I just want you guys to see, Troy was built by Israelites, as it says in this ancient document. Our race, its origin, and its destiny. A serial devoted to the study of the Saxon riddle. The renewal of history, how empire was rebuilt and replanted. Eokide, the hegemon. And this is by Charles A.L. Totten. This is from 1892. And this part says, Moses now grows up as a prince in the house of Pharaoh. He is given the best education that Egypt could afford, and had for his companions in the schools Heman and Chalcol and Darda, the sons of Mahol, or Asariah, who was the son of Ethan, the son of Sarah, the son of Judah. Now, Chalcol and Darda were none other than Cecrops and Dardanos, okay? This is another book telling you that Darda is the same as Dardanos, and Chalcol is Cecrops in Greece, in ancient Greece, Cecrops. Again, both sons of Judah, the founders of Greece and Troy, okay? Sons of Judah, founders of Greece and Troy. Cecrops founded Athens, right? We're going to get more into that in another video. And Heman is the founder of Tyre, all right? Heman founded Tyre. Who's the Tyrians, so-called Phoenicians? Why is Herod the Great dealing with Solomon and King David? Because eventually they are king. They are related some way further back. And they also got Danite. The Tyrians got a lot of Danite blood. We've gone over that in my Danite videos. So Heman, again, all these people, sons of Judah, studied these nations.